Welcome to our, look at that. Well, we appreciate you being here early, Director.
I'm
as we
glad
are
to be
now-
able to accommodate.
We are now considerably ahead of schedule, and that's always a good thing. Well, we are now to the Board of Elections. Director Leonard, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. And joining me is Nguyen, who's our fiscal officer. So in case there's any questions fiscal related that I can't answer. But I did want to begin by thanking the Board of Commissioners for the opportunity, as well as the financial support over the course of this past year that kept the Board of Elections at the forefront of administering elections. And I do want to take the opportunity to publicly thank our Board of Election staff, full-time, all of our seasonal employees, and over 5,000 poll workers that worked this year's 2 elections. It's been an extremely busy year at the Board of Elections, as you'll hear, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank our county partners, facility management, the print shop, sheriff's office, purchasing department, as well as your own budget staff, who've been helpful for us throughout the course of the entire year. So when it comes to our accomplishments for the year,
It's not working.
I think you have to pound it against the desk.
As everybody jumps and runs over there as soon as he said that.
So it must not be synced.
There we go.
I turned it on.
all right.
Don't pound it again.
Yeah, there we go. So, well, I mean, as soon as the contract with election system and software and the agreement with the Secretary of State was approved in mid-January, the Board of Elections hit the ground running. We began acceptance of our tabletop and kiosk touchscreen voting machines, as well as the 550 ballot counters, those precinct-level scanners. During the run-up to the March election, we finalized the overhaul of our poll worker training materials, implemented new election programming and tabulation software. We refined our logistics operation to accommodate the demands of the new voting system. The Board of Elections had anticipated having to buy new voting transport carts for our voting equipment, but by retrofitting the existing transportation carts to hold the new equipment, we were actually able to save taxpayers over $588,000. And then instead of purchasing specialized voting equipment, or I should say voting booths, the Board of Elections was able to save another $541,000 by using a little bit more of a low-tech solution that involved standard fold-in-half folding tables and inexpensive privacy shields that fit around the tabletop voting machine, tabletop touchscreen units. And those folding tables and the privacy shields were actually much easier for our poll workers to use, as opposed to the setup of a voting booth. And they were easy for us to set up, take down, as well as transport with our existing transport carts. And then this summer, with the assistance of PFM, the Board of Elections was able to install 2 dock plates to our warehouse bay doors. This allowed us a lot more efficient loading and unloading of the voting carts and other equipment onto the trucks, the transport trucks that take them to the voting locations. And it substantially reduced the risk of damage to the retrofitted transport carts, which will allow us to get a few more years out of those old 14-year-old carts. Actually, quite a few more years out of those old carts. So, and then also as part of this implementation process, we engaged into a voter education effort where we provided demonstrations at 334 off-site locations. We had open hours, 160 open hours for our voting lab that we maintained at the Board of Elections, which afforded voters the opportunity to experience the new equipment. And then we had 22 demonstrations to the jury pool, the municipal court jury pool that we do every other week. And again, a little bit of a captive audience that we were able to demonstrate the new voting equipment to. But we went to libraries, city council, and other governmental meetings. We attended a lot of fairs, including the Children's Hospital Capable Disability Fair, the National Federation of the Blind Conference, Restored Citizen Summit, the Pride Festival, a lot of colleges and university events, as well as numerous recreation centers, senior centers, churches, and other community groups. One of the other accomplishments that we get to point to is safety and security. Once the Secretary of State issued his security directive in Directive 2019 in June of 2019, a good chunk of our time and attention was devoted to ensuring that Franklin County was going to meet the January 31st, 2020 deadline for implementation of all the requirements of that directive. We heard repeatedly from Secretary of State personnel that Franklin County was far better positioned than a vast majority of counties in Ohio when it came to meeting the requirements. And this will continue into 2020 as well, but we will be meeting the requirements. Of those, the cybersecurity implementation, all of our computer equipment is upgraded to a more current version of the Microsoft operating system, the more current version of the server operating system. Network security enhancements are underway in conjunction with the data center and with the Secretary of State's IT officials. A representative from Department of Homeland Security visited us in August to conduct a physical security test assessment that was mandated by the Secretary of State's directive. And the Deputy Director has been working with a internal group to implement the items identified in that assessment. We are in the process of implementation of multi-factor authentication capabilities for our systems. Obviously, we'll be moving to Microsoft 365, and that will have multi-factor authentication capability, as well as our current voter registration software system that we'll be utilizing for the first part of 2020. That will be upgraded to provide for a multi-factor authentication capability as well, and also password strengthening as part of that process with the Secretary of State's office. We've been doing cybersecurity training with our staff, phishing campaigns to, again, educate our staff about the security concerns that relate to those types of spear phishing campaigns that take place, and just, again, educating our staff to be vigilant in that regard. The Board of Elections leadership has participated in Secretary of State tabletop training exercises on dealing with election-related and cybersecurity and physical security-related issues. And then we've done some physical security upgrades. We've long had double locked doors in the ballot areas of the building. So we've had a lot of physical security measures in place, but we're also undertaking physical caging around some of our network equipment to provide an added level of security. And then we've been in the process of updating our ReliaVote software, or our ReliaVote equipment. The ReliaVote equipment is what we use to process the thousands upon tens of thousands of absentee by mail ballots. So we have absentee in person, but the absentee mail ballots are all processed utilizing the ReliaVote equipment. And we had anticipated, we were in process of doing the upgrade of the computers and the software that run that system to, again, ensure that it was secure. And that was underway before the Secretary of State's directive, and but it becomes part of it because it's mandated by the Secretary of State. So some of the other areas we've been working on, Operation Lights Out, which we implemented this year. Operation Lights Out is just, again, making sure that we're prepared to address electrical outages at our polling locations. We started it in the 2018 general election, and we experienced some of borrowing equipment. But in 2019, we have 6 new generators, and we've got teams assigned to be responsive in the event of a power outage, and we experience those, and we want to make sure that we're ready to respond. And so that initiative, we've named Operation Lights Out, so we can make sure that we're being prepared. As of yesterday's, and then we also did active shooter training, again, helping prepare our staff to respond, because, again, it can happen anywhere. And so we want to make sure that we're prepared as well. And so we appreciated the support of the Sheriff's Office in conducting that active shooter training. As of yesterday's coordination meeting with the Board of Election staff and the data center personnel, I'm very confident that we will meet the requirements of the Secretary of State Security Directive by the January deadline. One of the other accomplishments or work that we've had this year is the voter registration software upgrade. This has been ongoing for a couple of years. We initially looked at upgrading the existing system, but with the recommendation of the commissioner staff and the support for pursuing an entirely new system with a vendor that is well-versed and experienced in the maintenance of election software, we decided to go out to bid. That process culminated with this year's final evaluation, selection, and purchase of a new voter registration software system with input from the new data center director, have been very helpful for us in that process. And while I refer to it as a voter registration software system, it's truly an election data management system. The software manages more than just voter registration, and there's a lot that goes into maintaining a voter registration information. But again, the 10X election desk solution that we've acquired is more than just voter registration. It manages the poll worker training, scheduling, assignment, payroll processing, absentee ballot request processing, petition and candidate management processes, asset management, election day incident tracking and response. In fact, the implementation has begun with the election response module of the system was implemented and used for this past election. Again, and we are implementing some of the modules that contain functionality that we don't currently have, and we've implemented the election response for this past election. There are a few for this upcoming election that we will implement it. But we'll continue to function on the current integrity software system through the primary of 2020, and we anticipate that we will move to the new voter registration software system by July of this year, so that we'll go into the general election with the newest, latest system. While we were putting on the 2019 election, by necessity, we had to start devoting time and energy to preparing for the next 2020 election. One of the biggest challenges facing the Board of Elections is the continued efficient operation of the early vote center. A lot of voters have very much liked utilizing the early vote center and the convenience that it affords. And in-person voting has become extremely popular with voters and is only expected to grow in 2020. Some of the commercial development on the Board of Elections site has reduced the available parking for voters by 256 spaces. The parking lot resurfacing and restriping was undertaken to get back some of those spaces and has had the added benefit of improving our ADA compliance. So again, with the help of Chris Long and PFM and the engineer's office, we were able to accomplish that preparation. We also tested some of the off-site parking strategies that we want to implement in 2020 that will allow us to free up parking spaces for voters by having our staff park at an off-site location. And so we've been working on that, testing it out, trying to work out the kinks to make sure that when we do implement it in 2020, that it will run smoothly. And again, the focus is making sure that we provide as much parking on site for the voters. So the extent that we can have folks who are not voters parking on the site, we're going to do what we can to make sure that that we can relocate them so that we can make those spaces available for the public. And we also ran a mock election to see how we could improve the flow of voters through the vote center and increase the number of voters per hour that we can process through the vote center. By adding additional equipment, by reconfiguring the way the voters would flow through the early vote center, that would allow us to process more voters per hour. Because again, when we were with the old equipment, we were processing upwards of 700 to 850 voters in an hour in our peak periods. And with the limited parking, we need to move more voters more quickly through the process. The machines help in that regard because they are they are quicker to put a voter on the machines to get them started. And again, for that voter to get through that process, it's quicker. And so by being able to deploy more of them, I think we will be able to make that process faster. We more than doubled our phone capacity of the early vote or the election day hotline. Every election day, one of those unseen activities the board performs is we have a hotline where the voting location managers can call in to get questions answered. And so we have that hotline. We've actually been able to double the capacity of that hotline so we can answer more calls, but also address more calls. And we piloted a Monday night setup of the early vote center, or of the polling locations on election day. We had 100 sites that we did for this election. We anticipate expanding it to even more locations in the 2020 election. But again, we were able to pilot it to see how it would work for us. We've found actually that a number of other counties in Ohio were already doing this, and so we felt, if there are any challenges associated with it, that we could overcome those challenges and get this accomplished. Because again, the idea being it would allow us to get the voting locations open more quickly on election day by having as much of the non-essential activities done on Monday night, so that when the poll workers show up on Tuesday morning, that they can quickly get the essential functions up and running and get that polling location open by 6:30. So we also enacted a new process for our day drivers. For those not familiar with day drivers, they are our rovers. Those are the folks that are out in the field on election day, provided them with new phones, more real-time tracking utilizing the election response software, and some expanded responsibilities. We gave them more tasks to do while they are out there in the field. And so again, we felt it was effective use of those day driver resources. We created a dedicated social media coordinator to help enhance our social media presence and particular emphasis at election time. And then also with the assistance of the Board of Commissioners as well as PFM, that we acquired the Payless, the former Payless store.
That's a lease, just to clarify, we did not purchase that.
Oh, I'm
but
sorry,
it
thank
was
you,
a
a lease. So, and then, again, while we were doing all these tasks in 2019, we did have elections to carry out. So while, again, that's part of our main function is to carry out the elections, and we did that while we were doing all the other initiatives that were on our plate, and we were doing that with a brand-new system. So again, programming the elections on a new system, recruiting, training poll workers, thousands of poll workers on the new machines. We conducted all the logic and accuracy testing of all the equipment and figuring out how we were going to transport this new equipment. We streamlined our processing of provisional voters. I think I say we documented all our processes. I won't acknowledge all of them. We documented more of our processes. We cross-trained staff in a multitude of areas. Our petition and campaign finance continued their regular work. Not as many signatures to check in 2019, but still had that activity going. We also worked with the sheriff's office and the prosecutor's office to improve the way we meet our obligation to allow inmates who are awaiting trial to cast their vote at the county jail. Again, as we went through the year, we discovered we need to make some changes to improve that process, and we were able to do so. Now, no sooner are we about to put this election in the books, we'll be getting ready for the next one. But we have recounts next week in 4 jurisdictions in Franklin County. The week after that, we have the countywide audit of an election, and then 2020 petitions will get filed on December 18th. So no sooner we put this to bed, we'll be starting with the next one. So, which brings us to the 2020 initiatives. One of the immediate tasks on our plate is to integrate the additional 694 tabletop voting units into the inventory of our available equipment. I want to extend my thanks to the commissioners for their support of that purchase of additional equipment. We're also going to be developing strategies to ensure that the machines that we use at the early vote center and the machines that we use in training are redeployed the day before the election to ensure that every piece of available voting equipment is out in the field on election day. With the old system, the Ivotronic system that we had, we did the 100 early vote center machines couldn't be redeployed. The training equipment that we used to train poll workers couldn't be redeployed with the old Ivotronic system. The current system we have does afford us that capability, and so we have to work on both the internal process as well as the actual logistics process of getting those pieces of equipment out into the field, because we cannot be in a situation where we don't have every piece of available equipment out in the field for 2020. One of the major initiatives will also be to incorporate the ballot-on-demand printing capability. This initiative will allow the Board of Elections to fulfill its requirement to have paper ballots available for voters who want to vote by paper, while at the same time avoiding the substantial waste and storage issues that are created by pre-printing a large quantity of paper ballots to fulfill this requirement. Having this ballot-on-demand capability simplifies the process for our poll workers, because as you may be aware, in a lot of our locations, voting locations, there are multiple ballot styles that are available because of all the combination of House, Senate, congressional districts and municipalities and school districts, that there are multiple ballot style combinations in a large majority of our precincts. Then add that on top of that, Democrat, Republican, and independent and other party affiliations, that we would have to be able to manage that. By having a ballot-on-demand system, it simplifies that process for our poll workers and ensures that the voter gets the right ballot. So this capability was also needed because we work with the print shop to print our ballots in advance, particularly the absentee ballots and some of the ballots the ballot stock that will be there for provisional voters. But they're strained to provide us with that quantity. And so by utilizing a ballot-on-demand capability, it'll allow the print shop to be able to accommodate our needs with the current equipment that they have. We're going to continue testing and implementing the 10X election desk software, the voter registration or election data management system. Again, anticipating that we'll go live in 2020, July of 2020. And then using the data from our mock election that we held in August of this year, we'll reconfigure the layout and the amount of equipment so that we can increase the number of voters that we can process through the early vote center. Because again, we had lines as long as an hour or more for the early vote center. And people still, even though they sometimes waited an hour or more, they were still pleased with the process because they continued to move. But if I've got an hour's worth of people and an hour's worth of a line, that tells me I've got a lot of people parking in the parking lot. And that was part of the reason we are striving to free up as many spaces, not just looking at the parking lot, but looking at the internal processes at the Board of Elections and the early vote center to try and speed that process up. So the Board of Election staff will also be looking to implement some enhancements to the parking capacity. Again, working on having our staff shuttle from off-site, potentially also making shuttle available for voters who may park across the street from the early vote center. And then also anticipating some enhancements. I've been working with the engineer's office, to work on getting some barriers that would afford some pedestrian safety, because I know Commissioner Boyce, you had expressed some concern, and rightfully so, about the safety, because when you've got that many people waiting in line, we want to make sure that they're not at risk of getting injured. And so to the extent that will be part of that enhancement to the early vote center parking area, as well as assisting voters in getting into and out of the parking lot as quickly as possible. So we are working on that. We recognize that we want to continue to have that early vote center be a model and a definite bright spot that people appreciate in terms of the way government operates for them. And then we are also expanding our communication partnerships, building off our Champions of Democracy program, where we encourage our community partners to be poll workers. We're going to expand our ability to communicate with the public by working with corporate and government partnerships as well as our colleges and universities, to expand and spread important information about elections. It began by the idea of reaching out to those organizations, companies that bill their customers, AEP, Columbia Gas, and from there it just grew to, well, any organization that communicates with their workforce, with their customer base, and so by expanding and working with those, building those partnerships, we can communicate important election information to a broader spectrum of the community. It's just a resource or an opportunity that we need to take advantage of. Same holds true with colleges and universities. They all have ways to communicate with their staff, with their faculty. They all have ways of communicating with their student body. And so by working with them, we can help get information to those groups in a way that makes the most sense and in a low-cost way by partnering with, again, other government institutions, all of our suburban communities and that communicate and have social media presence, that we work with them to get that message out, as well as corporate partnerships and our colleges and universities. And then a recent personnel change actually spurred a review of the processes that we use to handle the return of equipment and materials on election night. And we've actually begun to develop some enhancements to the election night drop-off process to facilitate a faster processing of election night results and a more efficient handling of the materials when they get back to us on election night from the poll workers. Again, it's just that opportunity to really look at it a little bit more closely and realize that there are some things we can do differently to facilitate, and this said, facilitate faster processing of election night results. And again, we look forward to implementing that in 2020 as well. And finally, I wanted to discuss the 2020 communication plan. I know over the course of 2019, I had worked with members of the board to try and identify ways that we could come to an agreement of some sort to communicate to the public in a paid media format to provide information about voting machines, early vote, and so forth. But on November 18th, just a week or so ago, I presented the board members with a written plan for a 2020 communication proposal. It had contained a detailed explanation of why I believed a communication plan, including a paid media component, was needed for 2020. Again, when it comes to the needs, what I talked about in terms of the early vote center and the idea that we need to try and encourage our voters to utilize that early vote center for the entirety of the 28-day period, as opposed to waiting to the very end, encouraging voters to take advantage of the vote by mail capability. The voters can do that. And so that's one of the rationale, because again, we see the numbers increasing. We have a number of new voters in the community and a number of younger voters. But again, I laid out for the board both a number of different rationale that would justify why we need to be engaging in a wide-ranging communication plan that included a paid media component. My proposal included 4 funding options based on the types of messages that would be communicated, the type of media that was used, and then whether the funding option covered primary and general election, or whether it just covered the general election. I identified that it made sense that there were 3 messages. One was registration, the upcoming registration deadline, informing voters how to update their registration, why they may need to update their registration, how they can do that online. Then another message, and that would be at a certain time frame before the deadline for voter registration, makes sense. And then the next message would be an early vote message that would occur at the beginning of the early vote cycle, and that message would focus on encouraging voters to utilize the early vote process, to vote earlier, to vote by mail. Again, the idea being it would relieve the strain on the polls on election day, but would also encourage people to utilize the early vote resources earlier in the process. Because I think our voters all know that we're open those last couple of weekends, but may not necessarily realize that we're open a good chunk of that 28-day period before Election Day. And then the final message would be during the last few days of, week or so of the run-up to the election, and that message would be voter ID, what kind of voter ID voters need to bring to the polls, and how voters can verify their polling location. Because again, part of the reason, the three big reasons why voters have to vote provisional is they haven't updated their registration, they show up at the wrong location, or they don't bring the right ID. And so by having different messages at different phases, a registration message encouraging people to update their registration before the registration deadline, a message in the run-up to the election that would encourage people to make sure that they have the right ID and make sure that they verify where their right polling location is. And so having those messages and communicating them in a variety of different media, and then the question just is whether it's a message for the primary or the primary and general. Well, I should say the primary and general, or just the general only. So I made the presentation of the proposal at the November 22nd board meeting. It was the day that we were certifying our election results, so they gave me the opportunity to present an oral presentation of that proposal, and then I anticipate that we will have further discussion of that at the December 9th regular board meeting. And with that, I guess, again, I want to thank you for the opportunity. If there are any questions, I want to express my thanks for your support of the Board of Elections. And I, again, want to express my thanks to the members of your team and the other agencies that have provided us with support over the past year, and I know are going to be great partners for us in 2020. And with that, if there are any questions.
Commissioner Boyce? Director, was there anything other than the expected normal reaction on November 22nd?
No.
And would there be any expectation for anything other than the expected normal reaction on December 9th?
I don't know. I mean, again, I tried to make as persuasive an argument and try and put it in terms that really emphasize, the risks of disinformation that our current Secretary of State has expressed in various settings, the concern about disinformation campaigns and the threat that they pose, and the need to be more vigilant about encouraging voters to get their information from trusted resources. The Senate Intelligence Committee, in its report, recommended that education efforts be undertaken to encourage voters to get their information as early as possible. Laid out the fact that we've had 40 now with this past November election, we had over 48,000 voters in Franklin County who had to vote provisionally. Of those, over 6,000 provisional ballots were rejected because voters didn't update their registration, didn't go to the right polling location, or they didn't have the right ID. Is trying to make as best a case as I can about the need for that. And also the fact that we've had 24,000 new 18-year-olds since the last presidential election. We've had over 16,000 new citizens naturalized over the last 4 years. We have 164,000 voters who've moved to Franklin County, or who have registered in Franklin County. That doesn't include all the people who've moved from other counties into Franklin County. It doesn't include all the people who've moved from one place to another in Franklin County. And so trying to lay out as strong a case as I can for why we need to engage in a broad-based education plan.
Well, and you're also making the same case that I've been making for the last many months, and I appreciate you doing that. So, Director, earlier this month was the first time we used the brand-new voting machines, correct?
Yes.
And what was the percentage of the turnout in the election this past November 5th?
22%.
22%. What's the anticipated percentage of the turnout, roughly? A guesstimate, what what would you say is the expected percentage of the turnout in March? In your education?
We will have, I mean, past presidentials, we've had approaching, well, for March. For March.
Presidential primary with a contested primary.
I don't, I mean, I'd probably have to put that in the
Substantial.
neighborhood. It'll be substantially more, easily twice what.
At least twice.
At least twice what
At
we.
least twice. And then in the general election, what is generally the expected?
Generally, we have a 70% turnout, and about 40% of that 70% is early vote. So of that 70% turnout, 60% of that is going to be
next
people
couple
showing up at the
of-
polls.
So the next couple of elections cycles, we can expect to have a substantially larger voter turnout than in the last election. I went to vote in my precinct on election day. You know, I know that we encourage people to do early vote, and the party's really great at encouraging people to do early vote. My wife and I are traditionalists. We like to vote on election day. We like to take our kids to vote on election day. I took my daughter to use the new machines. I, had the advantage of, thanks to you, having the experience of voting on one of the new machines previously. Went to vote in my precinct, didn't get a whole lot of instruction on how to vote on the new machine. Didn't get a whole lot of instruction on the fact that once I voted on the new machine, that I, had to take the card over to insert it before my actual votes were counted. And I didn't have a whole lot on my ballot. There was very little in my township to actually vote on. And so, I'm just very concerned that we haven't advertised at all for the election in some time. We're not likely, unless this Board of Commissioners does something about it out of the ordinary, we're unlikely we're certainly unlikely to get any help from our friends at the Board of Election, Republican friends on the Board of Election. Unlikely to get any assistance there, to get any voter education on, or advertising on, this election on brand-new equipment that is substantially different from the way that the people in this county have voted. And this is only one reason, one of many reasons why I think it's important to advertise the election. You've enumerated a whole series of other reasons why it is that it's important for us to advertise this election. But the fact that we have brand-new, significantly different voting equipment, my 11-year-old has been voting with me since she was a little girl. My 11-year-old is pretty sophisticated when it comes to this stuff. She can vote with the best of them. She walked in and she was like, "Whoa, what is this?" And it was a whole new system. And, thankfully I had voted on it before. And we got very little assistance from the folks at my polling place on how to vote. Now, granted, they know who I am. But they shouldn't have assumed that I knew how to vote on this stuff, and they did. But I'm just worried. I'm real worried that when we have lines at polling places, that you're gonna get a lot of complaints, which means that I'm gonna get a lot of complaints, which means Commissioner Boyce is gonna get a lot of complaints, which means Commissioner Brown's gonna get a lot of complaints about this new system. And I know I sound like a broken record, but I just, and the idea that we don't need to advertise the election and educate voters is, I think, one of the more ridiculous arguments that I've made or had with people since I've been a county commissioner. I just think, and I know that, it's just, there's something much different here than just, a difference of opinion. There's definitely something going on here, so.
Yeah.
We need to continue to search to find, a way to educate voters about when the election is, about where to go to vote, about how to do it, about the fact that there's new equipment, and a whole multitude of things, about how to register, about, we've got more, as you've said, this is the fastest growing county in this part of the country, let alone the state. We've got more new Americans, we've got more reasons why we should be advertising the election, why we should be advertising registration, why we should be advertising, people's right to vote. And the idea that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle do not agree with this, in my mind, smacks of one thing and one thing only. So, I'm sorry. Anyway, Commissioner, do you have any, because we do have a speaker.
No, the only thing I would add is that, you had a social media coordinator, position, you said was new. And
Why?
Sorry. Thank you very much for reminding me to turn my microphone on. You have a social media coordinator.
Right.
What are you gonna coordinate? What's there to coordinate?
Again, so it's all Facebook, Google, getting messages out that way.
Right,
But
I'm saying, what the content? What content are you going to, what messages are they going to get out?
the same messages we would put out in terms of.
Exactly.
Right, the trying to do it as much as we can without with utilizing if we don't have the resources because of a division within the board, is at least doing what we can to communicate the same messages, in a way.
Beware of Russian bots, Director.
Well, and again, that was part of the reason why, again, disinformation campaigns. And one of the things I did point out in my memo to the board was the fact that we've already been the victim twice with disinformation efforts. When in 2016, there was that viral story that went out about that there were ballot boxes in the basement of a warehouse in downtown Columbus that were already filled out for Hillary Clinton, which was nonsense, but it got propagated and it was out there. And then in 2018, there was a viral video that went out that showed a paper jam, but tried to portray it as some nefarious ballot switching, because it showed, the paper tape showed a vote for Cordray, and the machine showed a vote for Governor DeWine, and it was portrayed as if it were some type of, nefarious programming, when in fact it was a paper jam, and it took the Secretary of State's office working with Homeland Security and YouTube to get that video taken down. But again, so we've already been targeted. Our voters have been targeted. And so, again, we're a battleground county and a battleground state that, again, it warrants us making the effort to communicate as best as possible. And we have voters whose votes are not counting because they don't get their registration updated. They don't know what voter ID they should bring, or they're showing up at the wrong polling location. So, I appreciate your support in helping make the case, and I'm doing the best I can to make that case as well.
Yeah,
Okay,
we know you are, thanks.
I appreciate it. We have a speaker. So first I am required, so if you could come on up to our brand-new rostrum here. I am required to read the rules. If you could please keep your remarks limited to 3 minutes. I love saying that to our speaker today.
I know what.
Speakers will limit their remarks to the topics regarding today's budget agenda item. I don't think she'll have any problem with that. And, please do not, or if you could please refrain from any obscenities or commercial advertising, and please refer from any defamation or slander of the panelists. If you could please keep making sure that you are not in any violation of disorderly conduct or disturbing the public meeting of the Ohio Revised Code. Thank you very much. And today's speaker is Barb Hikes from the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner and staff. Thank you, Director Leonard. I'm going to pass something out here, and since I didn't bring apparently enough copies.
Well, I think I have a lot. Ooh. I'll share mine with you for the record here in a minute.
Okay, I'm Barb Hikes, as he said. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus, and we have one mission, and that is making democracy work. We're an organization that's more than 100 years old. We started out with people working diligently for years and years to get the right to vote for women. And then, once we got the right to vote, we switched our focus to now enabling people to vote and educating people to vote so that they would know where to do this, how to do this, et cetera. I do want to say thank you, Director Leonard, for the participation of your staff in our most recent Voter Girl event, where you brought the voting machines, and girls were able to learn how to use the machines themselves so they could go home and teach their parents what to look for on Election Day. We've also run into your folks at other sites, at Walnut Ridge High School, at the Reeb Center. We appreciate the idea that you're in the community to get the public seeing the new machines to begin with. My concern is, and has been, the lack of advertising, the lack of promotion that goes on for just general elections, much less this being a presidential year. We're very concerned what's going to happen, what kind of message is going to be going out to the public. And you mentioned some of the things that you would like to see in messaging. I will tell you that one of the things that I am concerned about that needs to be in someone's messaging is that our elections are secure, that people should be able to come in and vote and know that their vote will not be tampered with, that it will be counted, and that they can have confidence in our elections. I am concerned, though, that, yes, there's going to be tons of candidate advertising for these elections. I mean, I know that that's generally a response that people give is, how can you not know there's an election? There's, all this candidate advertising that'll be going on. But that advertising does not address the things that I was talking about. Where to vote, how to vote, when to vote. Those are the things that we want to see publicized so that our voters in Franklin County can show up and have their votes count and walk away satisfied that they've done their part. But a quick question for you, thinking about the advertising or the need for advertising, and I won't do what I did at dinner on Sunday. I won't ask for people to respond. I'll just say, think about this. Do you know what the last day for voter registration is for the primary election? All kinds of answers came out on Sunday, none of which were right. But that if, I'm in a family that is very engaged civically. I'm in a family that pays attention to these things. I had the grandmother who did not have the right to vote until after 4 of her children had been born. And I had the grandmother whose home you did not show up and say, no, I've got busy, I didn't vote. No, I really didn't take the time to figure out who I should vote for, so I didn't vote. That's not something you did at my grandmother's house, and it's not something you do at my house. So anyway, we need to make sure that if people that are civics junkies don't have the answers to this, then think about the people who are busy running their everyday lives, putting food on the table and getting the kids to their activities. They are not thinking about what that deadline is. They need to know to be able to make sure that their registration is taken care of. We're not the only organization. There are a number of other nonpartisan, non-political organizations in town that are likewise looking to figure out how is it that we can encourage people to vote, how do we boost voter turnout, how do we get people educated so that they can vote. The activities that we primarily are, seen in the community doing voter registration, trying to do voter education. We also do things like, we try to be active on social media. We have a small group of people who've put together 3 different videos on YouTube for how do you vote when you're away at college? Why should I vote? How do I protest? How do I make my voice heard? So we've got activity like that out there right now. The voter information bulletin that I handed you, this is one of our primary activities for the election in the fall. In the springtime and in the fall, but in the springtime, we rely on a Vote 411 card to provide the same information. But that Vote 411 card starts out with, where do you go vote? And what's the date for voting? We fundraise all the time to be able to do things like this. So, the idea that the county commissioners are offering up money to do advertising to the board of, so that the director can get this message out and that it might not be used is a very painful thing for me. It's difficult to think about people not getting this message out because of the lack of advertising. I guess my question would be, is there a way we can partner with you? Is there a way to partner with the commissioners, to partner with the Board of Elections, to provide information, to get information out to people? And again, here I do want to say, not only the League of Women Voters, but also other organizations like Ohio Votes and so forth would cherish the opportunity to get a grant to help pay for some of this kind of thing so that I'm not fundraising to get this printed. So, anyway, the last thing that I want to say is, some of the things that we've talked about already, where and when and so forth to vote, but there's also, when I left the Board of Elections the last time, I picked up a little Xerox sheet of paper that was kind of a by the way. If you were turning in a request for an absentee ballot right now for the March primary, it will not be processed because you're turning it in too early. You need to wait and turn that in after a certain date. I didn't know that. And I looked at that and thought, okay, if the only way anybody knows this is this little piece of paper, that's a pretty scary thought. There was a letter to the editor in the newspaper following this last election that was very complimentary of poll workers at a specific location where they provided curbside voting for a disabled individual. That individual didn't know they could do curbside until they went, realized they couldn't get in, went back home, called the Board of Elections and said, what now? And then got sent back to the same location with the information on how to do curbside voting. If they'd known that to begin with, they would have showed up and been done, and that would have been it. Lots of things that can be done, lots of things that we absolutely want to, communicate here. I guess the last thing that I'll say is, in the heading of voter misinformation and not even knowing the difference between municipal election years and presidential election years, at the phone bank, which the League of Women Voters staffs on Election Day, with thanks to our partners at Channel 10, I got the question, why aren't the county commissioners on my ballot? I showed up to vote and they're not on my ballot. And I'm like, I talked to the woman, and apparently she had received a piece of literature in the mail that had pictures of commissioners, so she assumed that they would all be on the ballot. Someone else wanted to know why he couldn't vote for Trump today. So, again, lots of confusion out there. There's ways to address a lot of it. We'll never get all of it. There's ways to address a lot of it. And I beg you, if you can't advertise, then partner with the community organizations that are working on getting the education out there for our voters. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, and by the way, this would be readable print if we had more money.
Well, she went over her 3 minutes, but she is
I
my
did,
mother.
didn't I?
She is my mother-in-law, so I wasn't cutting her off. So, well, I like that, so we'll have to have a discussion. Director, thank you. Appreciate it. Obviously, you have, in your department, have been a topic of conversation on the 26th floor for, the majority of the year. You're well represented, though. Commissioner Boyce and I were both, grilled about the Board of Elections during our screening for reelection. But appreciate the time today. Good presentation.
Hey, Commissioner O'Grady, too, I also want to join you in thanking the director, but as also the League of Women Voters for being here and what you do and what you represent. I can't think of a greater partner for a nonpartisan display of information and resource for our community than the League of Women Voters. And I want to thank you for taking the time to come out to testify with us today. And I think there's something to talk about. So
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks, Commissioner O'Grady.
Thank you. All right, well, we are done for 2020, correct? For the 2020 budget cycle. We went through 5. We went through 5 today, and, we're only done 8 or 9 minutes early. Thank you.